Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we tear through the source material, all the best expert guides, to give you that ultimate shortcut to being well-informed. Today, our focus is on something everyone, and I mean everyone, does, ordering food in English.
And it seems so basic, doesn't it?
It really does.
You know the words, you know what a burger is, but as our sources show, this simple act is actually a minefield. It's full of these little linguistic tripwires.
Tripwires, that's a good word for it.
Yeah, and whether you sound like a confident, fluent customer or somebody who's accidentally a bit demanding,
Yeah.
it often comes down to just 2 or 3 tiny words.
Exactly. We're not just reading a menu today. We are really diving into the hidden social rules of English service interactions.
The social contracts, yeah.
So our mission for you, our listener, the learner, is to get you past just, is my grammar right, and into real cultural fluency. We want you to sound natural, confident, and maybe most of all, polite.
Precisely. The sources we looked at all really emphasize this. It's a shortcut to etiquette, not just vocabulary. It's all about those unwritten social rules. And if you get the etiquette wrong, even with perfect words, you create this friction. If you've ever felt a server's mood just, shift after you ordered,
Oh, yeah.
chances are you stepped on one of these tripwires.
And we found some absolutely crucial little nuggets in these guides. We're going to spend a good amount of time on the difference between can I get and can I have.
So important.
We'll look at why saying I want is almost always the wrong move, and we'll identify those.
Well, those non-negotiable words you just can't forget, like articles and please. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's just follow the whole experience. From the moment you walk in the door, you're hungry, you're ready to go, and that first exchange is about to happen. What's the protocol?
Right. So this first moment is surprisingly rigid, and it's really important for setting the tone.
Okay.
The sources show the server usually starts things off, and they're just focused on logistics. Pure logistics.
Just the facts.
Just the facts. You'll hear things like, hi there, how many people? Or a quicker table for 2. Right. Or maybe dining in or taking out.
Exactly. And the mistake a lot of people make, especially if they come from a culture where you have, longer greetings.
A bit more ceremony.
Yeah, more ceremony. The mistake is giving too much information or just getting kind of flustered.
So what's the right way to do it?
The sources are really clear on this.
Yeah.
Your response should be simple, direct, and this is the key, immediately softened.
Softened.
Yeah. So if the waiter asks table for 2, your response is just a clean table for 2, please.
Not just table for 2.
Never just table for 2. If they ask how many, you just say 3, please.
It's such a tiny word, please. But it sounds like it does a lot of heavy lifting.
It does all the lifting.
Yeah.
It turns what could be a command or just a blunt statement into a polite request for service.
Why is it so foundational? I mean, in other languages, politeness is sort of baked into the grammar, right?
That's a deep point, and it's exactly right. In Japanese, you have honorifics. In Romance languages, the verb you choose can signal formality. English doesn't really have that. Our verbs are the same no matter who we're talking to. So we have to manually add the politeness.
We have to bolt it on with words like please.
Exactly. Please and thank you aren't just decorations. They're essential. They signal respect, courtesy.
Yeah.
If you leave it off, table for 2, well, you've just issued a command.
And you've already started off on the wrong foot.
Immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Our guides are definite on this. You have to build that please reflex into your English.
Okay, so that brings us right to the next big moment. You're seated. It's time for the drink order. And here we hit our first major deep dive. Can I get versus can I have?
Yes. This is where it gets really nuanced because the difference between these 2 phrases says a lot about the situation you're in.
Okay, so the server comes over. What do they usually say?
Typically, they'll ask something like, can I get you something to drink? And notice the server often uses get. Can I get you?
So as the learner, what are my best options? Our sources had a couple of models.
They did. 2 really strong, polite options. The first one is, yes, can I have a glass of water, please?
And the other?
I'd like an orange juice, please. But let's stick with that first one for a second and really get into can I have versus can I get when it's the customer talking.
Right, because they both get you a drink in the end.
They do. The outcome is the same, but the social feeling is totally different. Let's start with the one the sources recommend as your default, your safe choice. Can I have?
What does that phrase imply? What's it doing socially?
Can I have is basically a request for permission. Permission to receive something. It keeps a certain level of politeness, of deference.
It sounds like you're saying, is it possible for you to bring this to me?
That's a great way to put it. You're asking about their capability to serve you. Because of that, it's seen as the neutral, polite standard. It works anywhere. Casual diner, fancy restaurant, it always fits.
So if you're ever in doubt about how formal a place is,
Default to can I have. Always. It's the safest bet. Now, compare that to can I get.
which I hear native speakers use all the time, especially in, like, coffee shops.
Exactly. And that's the key. Can I get is more casual. It's more transactional.
Transactional, how so?
When you say can I get, you're kind of asking, can I start the process of receiving this item? It's almost like a shortcut for, can I place this order now? It's less about permission and more about just initiating the transaction.
That makes so much sense. That's why I'd say, can I get a large coffee to go?
Yeah.
A busy counter. It's fast.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
It's totally fine, even normal in a cafe, a diner, a fast food place. But if you use can I get in a very high-end restaurant with white tablecloths,
It might sound a little off.
it might sound a bit out of place. Not rude necessarily, but like you brought casual language into a formal setting.
That is such a powerful distinction. It lets you adjust your language to the room. So if I see linen napkins, my brain should immediately go to,
Can I have a glass of your Cabernet, please? That's slightly more formal structure.
Yeah.
Just, it matches the environment.
and if I'm at a loud, busy bar,
Then, can I get a cheeseburger and fries? Sounds quick, efficient. It shows you get the vibe of the place.
but, and this feels like the most important point, whichever one I choose.
You must add that word. Always, please. Let's think about what happens if you don't. You say the casual phrase, can I get a glass of water? But you forget, please. It can suddenly sound really abrupt.
Like you expect it, not like you're asking.
Exactly. It's the difference between asking if something is possible and politely requesting the service to make it happen.
So mastering this first stage, the simple answer, the right choice of get or have, plus that non-negotiable please, is the foundation.
It's paramount. It shows you understand the social rules right from the start.
Okay, so we've handled the greeting, we've nailed the drinks, the server is back, it's time for the main event, the main course. We need to sound confident here, even if we're, sweating a little bit. What are the core foolproof phrases?
Right, so we're moving on to the big decision. The sources give us two fantastic standard phrases that are both polite and clear. They use what we call softeners.
Okay, phrase one, the go-to.
I'd like the chicken salad, please.
And phrase two, a slightly different angle.
Could I have the pasta, please?
Both of those cushion the request. Now, our source material said that I'd like might sound a bit formal, which seems, I don't know, like a contradiction. Why would a formal phrase make me sound more confident and natural?
That is a fantastic question, and it gets to the heart of English service culture. I'd like is short for I would like. That word would is a conditional.
Right.
It signals a preference that is conditional on the server being able to fulfill it. It's not a direct demand.
So how does that make me sound confident?
Because confidence in this situation isn't about being bossy. It's about showing you know the rules of the game. When you use a polite, slightly more formal phrase like I'd like, you're showing you have command of the social situation.
So the confidence comes from knowing the script.
Exactly. You're not fumbling for words. You're choosing the most appropriate, polished phrase. That's where the confidence comes from. Fluency in the social rules, not just the words.
That makes perfect sense. By choosing the more sophisticated option, you avoid all the pitfalls. You avoid sounding demanding and demanding. I'd like is just safe.
It's your secure default. It says what you want clearly, but wrapped in that essential layer of courtesy.
Okay, but what if I'm not ready? The server shows up and I'm still deciding between two things. I need to buy some time.
A very common problem. And the phrase you use here is critical. You need to say, with confidence, I need a few more minutes, please.
What if I just say something short like, not yet?
Ooh, that can sound really dismissive. Curse, I need a few more minutes, please, does two things at once. First, it acknowledges the server, and second, it gives them a clear signal that you're close to deciding. It respects their time.
And again, there's that, please. It turns a dismissal into a polite request.
It turns a roadblock into a smooth interaction. The server will probably say, of course, take your time, and everything is fine. No friction.
This leads us to a really great strategy, something that takes you from just being a customer to being, I don't know, an engaged person, seeking recommendations.
Ah, yes. This is one of the best native-style tricks for building a good rapport. The phrase is so simple. What do you recommend?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that one little question does so much more than just help you pick a dish.
It completely changes the dynamic. On a practical level, yes, you're getting insider info. The server knows what's fresh, what the chef is proud of today.
Right. You might find the best thing on the menu that way.
But the social effect is huge. When you ask that question, what are you communicating?
I guess. Trust. I'm
That-
showing I value their opinion.
Exactly. You are showing trust and interest and respect for their expertise. You're turning them from an order taker into a consultant.
And that little bit of flattery probably makes the whole interaction warmer.
Almost always. You immediately sound more friendly, more engaged. It shows you understand conversation,
Yeah.
not just the grammar of ordering.
But does this work everywhere? Like, if I'm at a super busy fast food counter, are they just going to roll their eyes?
That's a great point. In a really high-volume, low-interaction place, you might just get a quick, everything's good. But it's still not a rude question to ask.
So it never hurts.
It never hurts. And in any place that's a step up from that, a sit-down restaurant where the server actually knows the menu, it can start a really nice little conversation.
And if they recommend something like, the halibut is great tonight, I have to be ready to respond.
Right. You could say, oh, that sounds lovely. I'll have that, please. Or maybe ask a follow-up. Is the halibut very spicy? It shows you were listening.
So the theme of this whole section is about projecting something. Projecting confidence with, I'd like, and projecting friendliness with, what do you recommend?
That's it exactly. It's all about using these softeners to create a smooth, positive experience. Okay, now we need to pivot. We need to talk about the section where it all goes wrong. This is where that polite foundation we just built can get accidentally torn down.
This is where non-native speakers, even with good English, can really slip up.
They do. They've handled the greetings, but then they switch to this direct, forceful language that just, it creates instant friction.
These are the booby traps. Let's start with pitfall number 1, the big one, the most dangerous phrase in a restaurant, using the direct command, I want.
The sources all agree this is the single biggest mistake. Want is a linguistic hammer, and you need a feather. Let's go back to that anecdote from the source material.
The student who said, I want a fish.
Yes. Just picture it. This student, he's studied English.
Yeah.
He knows the noun fish. He knows the verb for desire, want. He thinks he's being perfectly clear.
Makes sense.
But when he says, I want a fish, the waiter's smile probably faltered. They might have hesitated and then asked a slightly awkward clarifying question.
Because the tone is just so jarring.
It's completely jarring. Grammatically, it's correct. You do want the fish. But culturally, in an English-speaking restaurant, it sounds demanding. It sounds strong.
It sounds like a child. I want a cookie.
That is the perfect analogy. It's the language a child uses with a parent. It focuses only on the speaker's internal impatient desire. It totally ignores the social exchange that's happening.
It sets up the dynamic as, my need is a command you must follow.
Right. And the server is a professional doing a service, not someone there to obey your commands. But I can hear a learner thinking, but wait, in my language, saying I want is normal.
And that's the core of the issue, isn't it? Direct translation.
It is. In many languages, the equivalent of I want is the standard polite way to order. English just evolved differently. We prefer that indirectness. We like the softness of I would like or could I have.
So rule number 1, if you even think the phrase I want the pasta, you have to mentally catch it and switch it.
You have to switch it every single time. The new reflex has to be I'd like the pasta, please. That mental substitution is the single most important skill from this whole deep dive.
Okay, on to pitfall number 2. This is another classic translation error, replacing I'll have with I take.
Oh, this is so common. It comes directly from languages like Spanish or French or German, where you use a verb that means to take when you're choosing from a menu.
So the incorrect version is I take the burger.
Right. And it's a logical error to make, but it sounds very strange to a native speaker.
So the correct phrase is...
The correct phrase is, I'll have the burger, please. Or you can always fall back on our safe phrase, I'd like the burger.
Why is I will have the right choice there?
Because in this specific context, I'll have signals your decision for the immediate future. It's a conversational way of making a commitment. It means, for this meal, the burger is the item I've decided to possess.
And what does I take the burger sound like?
It sounds like you are physically taking it right now, like off a shelf. Or it sounds like a weird habit, like every Friday I take the burger. It just misuses the verb for this kind of service transaction.
Okay, that's a clear one. Pitfall number 3 is more subtle, but it's a dead giveaway, forgetting the articles, a or the.
Yes. This is subtle, but it's constant. And it immediately marks you as a learner, even if your verbs are perfect. The incorrect version being, I'd like salad,
Instead of the correct, I'd like a salad, please.
or I'd like the salad of the day. This gets into the grammar of count nouns and non-count nouns. But basically, English needs these little words to specify what you're talking about.
Can you give us a quick rule of thumb for menu items?
Sure. Think about water. Water is a mass noun. So you can say, I'd like water. That's okay. But you're really ordering a serving of it, so it's much better to specify the container. I'd like a glass of water.
Okay. But what about something like soup or a steak?
Those are usually served as single units. A bowl of soup, a piece of steak. So they become count nouns in this context.
So I'm ordering 1 unit of soup.
Exactly. Which is why I'd like soup sounds incomplete. It sounds like you're talking about soup as a general concept.
Yeah.
You need to say, I'd like a soup, or more likely, I'd like the soup, referring to the specific one on the menu.
Without the article, it sounds choppy, staccato.
It does. The articles are the glue. They show you understand you're requesting a single serving of that item.
And that brings us to the final one. Pitfall number 4. The absolute worst one for tone. The bossy give me.
This is the one that has immediate negative impact. There's no ambiguity here. Saying give me a Coke is just bad.
Our sources said it sounds almost bossy.
I'd say it's more than almost. It is bossy. It's a direct command, an imperative. In English, we only really use imperatives as emergencies.
Give me the keys.
Right. Or when someone with a lot of authority is talking to a subordinate. By using it with a server, you're putting yourself in a wildly inappropriate position of power.
It sounds arrogant.
Arrogant, impatient, rude. A server hearing, give me, might honestly just pause for a second because it's so aggressive.
So the correction is non-negotiable. You have to soften it.
Always. You must convert that command. Go back to the safe structures. Can I have a Coke, please? Or, I'll have a Coke, please.
So the big lesson from all 4 of these pitfalls is really about directness. In English service situations, being too direct reads as being aggressive.
That's the core takeaway. Indirectness, softening language. Those aren't just polite suggestions. They are the fundamental rules of the road. So we've covered the words themselves pretty thoroughly, but that's really only half of the equation, isn't it?
Right. Our sources were really clear that your tone, your speed, your facial expressions, they matter just as much as getting the grammar right.
These nonverbal cues are so important. They can even save you if you make a small mistake with the words. And the easiest one, the most essential native-style trick, is just to smile.
It seems so simple.
It is, but projects patience and approachability. If you say a perfect sentence like, I'd like the steak, please, but you say it really fast with a flat expression and no eye contact,
The vibe is still negative.
the whole interaction feels cold. You're trying to show that you're a pleasant person to interact with, not just someone getting a task done.
It's about emotional intelligence, not just linguistic intelligence.
That's a great way to put it. A relaxed tone and a smile encourage the server to be more helpful, more friendly. It just smooths everything over.
Okay, let's drill down on one very specific pronunciation detail that really separates a fluent speaker from a learner. And that's how to say our key phrase, I'd like.
Yes, this is all about blending and reduction, how native speakers smush sounds together to speak more efficiently.
And the key is that I'd like shouldn't sound like 2 separate words. It should sound more like one smooth sound. I'd like.
Exactly. That little ood sound from wood just kind of merges into the ol from like. It becomes one fluid unit if you try to say I would like very carefully.
You sound like a robot.
You sound stilted. You sound like you're translating word by word in your head.
And natural conversation is just faster than that.
It's so much faster. The blending helps you keep up the pace. It makes you sound more confident because the words are just flowing.
So let's give the listener a little practice phrase to really feel that blend. The source suggested, I'd like a pizza.
Let's try another one to try to say this smoothly. I'd like a big glass of water, please.
I'd like almost becomes one sound. I'd like
Exactly. That little word gets reduced to an sound. That's where you find that real native sounding rhythm.
It's the music of the phrase, not just the notes.
That's it. Competence is knowing the words. Fluency is knowing the music.
Sure.
And when you master that I'd like blend, you are well on your way.
Okay, this has been a huge deep dive. We've gone from walking in the door to the nuances of get and have, and we've laid out those 4 critical pitfalls. So let's bring it all home. What does this all mean for our learner? What's the simple, practical action plan?
The plan is all about building new habits, new linguistic reflexes to replace the old translated ones.
Okay, action 1, always be polite. Default to that soft language. So that means using
Can I have, could I have, or I'd like. Those are your go-to phrases, your safety net.
Action 2. Those foundational words are not optional.
Never. Please and thank you. They are non-negotiable. They have to be attached to almost every single request you make.
Action 3. To be friendly and get good advice.
Use what do you recommend. It elevates the entire conversation from a transaction to an interaction.
And finally, action 4. The avoidance list. The things you must stop saying.
You have to eliminate them. Strictly avoid I want, give me, and that direct translation, I take. Just remove them from your restaurant vocabulary entirely.
That's a very clear 4-point plan.
And here's one final thing to make it stick. A call to action. You should practice these phrases even when you're not in a restaurant, even when you're speaking your own language.
How does that work?
When you're at home and you want something, you're about to ask your partner for the salt. In your head, formulate the request in English first.
So I'd think, could I have the salt, please?
Exactly. Or you're making coffee and you think to yourself, I'd like a coffee. It turns every little moment of desire into a practice session.
You're building the mental muscle memory.
You're wiring your brain so that the polite phrase becomes the default. So when you're in a restaurant under pressure, I'd like comes out automatically, not I want.
Okay. And finally, let's leave our listener with that provocative thought. We've spent this entire time talking about when things go right. You order perfectly, you're polite.
But the real test, the true master level of all of this, is what happens when things go wrong.
The steak is cold. They brought you the wrong drink. The bill is incorrect.
How do you complain politely? How do you correct an error without using those aggressive, direct words we just told you to avoid? That is a much, much harder challenge.
That is a high-stakes conversation. And a perfect topic, I think, for our next deep dive. Thank you so much for walking us through the menu.
My pleasure. Now go out there and order with confidence and politeness.